Now we will have a presentation from Joeli Veitayaki. Joeli Veitayaki has a PhD on environmental management and development from the university in Australia. And after he worked 32 years at the University of South Pacific, he's also director of International Ocean Institute Pacific Islands and is co-chair of the Korea South Pacific Fisheries Forum and member of the panel of experts for sustainable ocean economy. He has been collaborating with governments, NGOs, and development partners. He is working in the field of sustainability, use of and management of marine resources. And he published many different articles in a lot of different fields. I will not mention all of them, but what captured my attention was his talking about importance of subsistence and artisanal fisheries, indigenous knowledge and traditional resource management, and many, many other ones. So the aspect also of cultural aspect of fishing is also something which is captured by Professor Joeli Veitayaki. Thank you very much for coming, because you had a very long way. And it's a great pleasure having you there after some difficulties. But thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much for those kind words. I spent the last 3 days continuously trying to get here. Otherwise, I'd miss the boat. But I do so because this is such an important occasion, an important meeting, and I really feel that the topic that I was given, which is to look at IUU in coastal fisheries in the Pacific, is really important for a number of reasons. I'm sure you are all much more knowledgeable about IUU than I am, but the problem, in my view, is maybe ranked amongst the most serious of the challenges facing humanity, because with the definitions that you have been going over, it's illegal, unreported, and unregulated. It actually, I would like to argue, includes a lot of the other issues that we often address in isolation. And I think with what little I've heard today, and I assume with what you've heard the last few days, you've actually covered the width and breadth of the challenge that is IUU. And that is the challenge for us. You more than I've just retired, so I'm sort of on my way out, but you have to address this issue for the sake of humanity in the years to come. And basically, that's part of the few messages that I want to bring to you, to live with you. If you don't remember me and all the other things I'm going to talk about, just remember that IUU is a big challenge that needs international attention, collaboration, partnerships, and all of that. Secondly, I want to introduce something that may actually sound odd, because IUU up to now is focused on which fishery? IUU up to today focused largely on industrial fishery, offshore fishery. The part that I was asked to talk about is actually coastal fishery. And I was really happy to hear earlier in the morning about the importance of artisanal fishery, because that's part of what I have to talk about, to try and convince you that we now need to think, or maybe recalculate our focus. Perhaps it's now time to widen the thing a bit, because all of the challenges of IUU happening in the industrial fishing areas, distant water areas, distant water fishing areas, basically the EEZ and beyond, they also occur in coastal waters. And that's my argument that I would like to leave with you. And that the management of this coastal fishery is now critical. If we don't get our act together and manage our coastal fisheries resources, the source of food for our people in the coastal countries that we come from are going to be under threat. And that, I think, is an even more serious challenge than all that we are talking about today, because it does not really directly affect food and food supply in our different coastal states. The last point I want to mention is the relationship between IUU and subsidies. Okay, again, the focus has been on trying to control subsidies in industrial fisheries, in the large-scale sector, but the same challenges, in my view, occur at that coastal fishery level, and that's a challenge because, particularly in the region that I come from, a lot of our countries are trying to protect their right to decide on what the coastal fishery is developed into. But I think we now need to really be very open in our discussions about the threat that potentially can affect negatively what goes on in coastal fisheries. So basically, those are the kinds of messages that I would like you to think about as you go back to continue with the very good work that you are doing. The region I represent today is dominated by small island countries, a lot of them too small to be seen in a global map. You look at the map of the world, there's a big blob between Peru and Chile to the west, and then all the way to Southeast China to the east, with a few bigger blobs represented by the bigger countries, Papua New Guinea, New Caledonia, and some of the others. But when it comes to EEZ, we have some of the biggest countries in the world. In fact, Kiribati, can you see Kiribati from there? Kiribati occurs in 3 major groups. That's the first, that's the second around Phoenix, and that's the third. So Kiribati has the biggest EEZ in the Pacific, and I think it's 4th in the world. Lucy, you know? Yeah? So the point is, with the law of the sea, some of our small island developing states have become really huge ocean states. But as we've heard as well, this comes with a lot of responsibility. These coastal states, very few of them have navies, airplanes, not even in the calculation, but they have to be responsible. They have to exert effective control over these extensive areas of EEZ under their jurisdiction. And that is a challenge for humanity if they can't do it properly, because not only are they responsible for the part shaded in white, they also have to look after these blobs in blue that are part of the high seas. The areas beyond the EEZ of countries are part of the high seas, and that's where industrial fishes from distant countries, that's where they have the right to be. But the problem is, if you are there and you know that the nation next door is not really capable of sending out a boat to check on your activities, you then may be tempted to encroach. And that is the challenge in relation to the Pacific Island countries. Small island countries in terms of land, territory, but huge when it comes to EEZs and maritime zones that need to be effectively managed. Okay, so this was done before the beginning of the week, so I'm sure you are familiar with the definitions and the challenges. But again, please bear with me as I take you through the challenges that I would like you to decide if they are close enough to what you are dealing with when working with distant water fishing, to then think about whether it is the right thing to do to continue to exclude coastal fisheries from the wider discussions on IUU. This is a traditional fish drive, often conducted in the Pacific. So basically, that's the only fishing. The fishing gear there is the that rope of vine wrapped around with coconut leaves. Okay, for some reason, our ancestors knew that if you have those structure or that structure dangled in the water, it frightened fish away. So they then use that. They can cover huge areas, kilometers long, and then involve as many people as possible as they walk their way towards the shallow parts. Okay? When you talk about people walking on the reef, okay, the damage is huge. But at the end of the day, they'll have to get this structure as close as possible to the shore so that they are there in a nice sandy spot before the water totally runs out. So they have to get all the catch to a place where it would be easier for them to collect the result. So that is a problem. Just the practice of those kinds of damaging fishing activities. Okay, with IUU fishing, this is the definition that. Of course, all those, and I agree, I've heard this again this morning, it is happening in all fisheries, in all waters, in all places, and particularly so in places where there are weak governance and where people are corrupt. Okay? And of course, we often have those in countries like the ones that I come from. And the problem is that with those kinds of weaknesses, it then weakens the governance, which then results in things like this. This is a creek out of a food processing plant, but it basically gets into, flows out towards a river and then eventually out to sea. Okay? So when people are talking about coastal fisheries, they are affected by things happening maybe miles or on the other side of the island, in this case, such as in this case in small island countries or contexts. With coastal fisheries, it's mostly done in inland and coastal waters by local people using a mixture of customary, traditional, and increasingly modern fishing methods. Okay? The other part to remember is that we're talking about multiple species, multiple sectors. Okay, so as I was saying, we used to think that industrial fishing is restricted to areas out there, but practice in the Pacific has shown that there's some IUU practiced within the coastal fisheries. The other issue that I have heard over here already is the problem of lack of data. Yes? Unfortunately, there is no easy way to get data. You have to basically do the hard work in order to get the data. But without the data, you're trying to manage a resource you know very little about. And that is an even bigger challenge because your management plans and strategies may not actually work. Okay? Management is difficult in coastal fisheries, but it needs to be done. Okay? Because if it is not done, like in this case, that's me in years gone by fishing, because this community was expecting the arrival of an aggregation during aggregation time for this species. So 2-3 days before the actual happening, this peninsula where I was at was totally surrounded by gill nets, and nobody would retrieve their net for those days. Otherwise, they risk losing the space that they already have. So basically, the nets were there continuously for about 3-4 days until the arrival of the species. They rise from the coral reef, but they need to go to the mangrove to spawn. So this is interception. I was just there to show that that's the kind of catch they have. By the time I was to return back to the urban area, the boat I had hired to take me back was actually loaded with all this catch, most of it from this one species. Okay? And that's the problem with traditional knowledge. Our people also know of things like this, that if overexploited, can really be damaging for the species and for the environment. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make is that IUU is just as serious in the coastal fisheries as it is in fisheries that are in the EEZ or beyond. For coastal management, I've also heard of the definitions of management being given. I like this one that I've learned from these sources long time back. That management of coastal fishery, because of its very nature, demands an integrated process involving the gathering of information, the analysis of that information, planning, consultation, because you're dealing with owners of the resources, so you have to talk to them. You may be the scientist, you may be the lawyer, but you have to talk to the indigenous people who are the owners of the resources and maybe even the major users. And then the formulation, implementation, enforcement of regulations that, and this is really important, that govern the fisheries activities to ensure continued productivity. That's why your job is really important, because the availability of fish in the future will rest with all of us who are in this business. We don't want to be the ones that are blamed. Oh, we no longer can have that. That species has disappeared. Our fisheries managers were not doing their jobs. Just to make our work even more complex, okay? At the 11th World Trade Organization Ministerial Conference in 2017, they made an agreement to extend this, this mandate that they were given in the 10th meeting of the ministerial of the ministers to decide on subsidies within the coastal fisheries. So the time came and went, and at the 11th meeting, they then authorized the group to go back to have an extension and come back at the 12th meeting with an agreement on addressing subsidies within coastal, or the use of subsidies within coastal fisheries. Okay. Unfortunately, the 12th meeting just happened last June. They agreed on a lot of things, but they still did not agree on how to address the use of subsidies in coastal fisheries. And this is an important point to make, because a lot of the coastal states, like the Pacific Island, small island developing states, they really want to hold on to their what's the right? Special and special and differential treatment. They want to hold on to that, but at the same time are also quite worried about what is going on with coastal fisheries. So it's an issue that representatives of developing countries, particularly those in that category, the small island developing states, they need to work on an agreement for. Otherwise, it's time being wasted and lost in terms of addressing the challenge that needs to be addressed in this case. Okay, so as I was saying, on the 12th of June 2022, this was the agreement from the meeting, but as it states, okay, number 3, negotiation group on the rules shall continue the negotiations on outstanding issues that particularly relate to subsidies and the special and preferential treatment. Okay. By the way, this is the kind of catch that you get from fish drives. Okay. I was actually there in this place when this happened. After about the 3rd day, a lot of the villages were dumping fish that have rotten because they don't have storage. They can't eat it all within the time that they have, so a lot of it goes to waste. We now need to understand that we need to take only what we really require and let the others stay for the next time we need them. In terms of the challenge is long and complicated. Again, I've listened to some of the addresses being made earlier today that talk about this is a river where the right was given for the extraction of gravel. So basically, after a few months of gravel extraction, that's how it looks. Rivers are important for the fertility of estuarine and coastal fisheries. If this is how the rivers are being damaged, you can then imagine the repercussion on the fisheries. In addition, there are things like climate change affecting the biodiversity because of things like coral bleaching, acidification. Then if our food sources fail, then we're going to have problems with food security and of course with the loss of sources of livelihood. There are these examples of polluted fisheries. I'm not too sure whether we can call them dead zones yet, what they have in the little islands, but there are certainly some very heavily polluted environments. Subsidized commercial fisheries, these are the kinds of things that can be supported through subsidies, and that is why subsidy is tied to a potential threat for sustainable fisheries and also connected to IUU. Okay, the use of dynamite for fishing, that is, I think, practiced quite widely. Illegally caught turtles. A lot of these very special fish are under threat because of their popularity and their use, but we still have to come up with good, effective management arrangements for a lot of them. This is the kind of fish that we were catching at the time when I was out there fishing with them. That species, or those fish there, were stopped from going to the mangrove to spawn by the fishes using their traditional knowledge. So they no longer contribute to the propagation of fish for the next generation. And that's the problem when fish are caught in such or under such during that kind of time. Catching of undersized crabs, unfortunately, the most expensive of our commodities coming from our fishery, they are being sold even when their populations are struggling. The misuse or maybe the part of the IUU activities that's going on in coastal fisheries. There's even in areas where some attempts are being made to manage the fishery, there is poaching, there is all kinds of violations. Enforcement is an issue because, as I showed you in the map, the islands are far apart, they are small, so even the national governments have a hard time trying to address the activities in all those different locations. Custodians of fishing grounds who have customary rights to enforce the management of their fishing areas, unfortunately, they are the least equipped to face up to the challenges because the poachers often have better boats, are more powerful, so they can just run away. They often now can fish in the night while the owners of the fishing ground are asleep. So the problem is really serious. This is a fishing boat, FAO design fishing boat, but these are the kinds of subsidies that we are talking about. In receiving these kinds of subsidies to enhance the capacity of local people using the resource need to be looked after carefully because it can actually cause overuse of the resources. In terms of development, a lot of our countries are getting into that phase. The problem of destruction of mangroves and coastal habitats, that affects the productivity of the fishing grounds. Of course, the alteration of environment for whatever reason, that too is important. And even the abuse of fishing license. I think a lot of discussions points have been raised on this by previous speakers. The rules are there, but people, being people, I always say to my students that we humans are very difficult to deal with. Okay, this is just an example of the kind of threat that exists in IUU fishing. What is this animal? Can you see? Can you still tell? That's sea cucumber, BDM, beach dimmer, dried already. But you can see the size is not that big. Okay? The people that were harvesting this were sure that it's a gift from God. Okay? And I was saying to them, well, God also has a limit for living things because it has to take a while for them to breed, mature, and then reproduce. But you're harvesting the little ones, eventually things will finish up. Okay? But they said, no, he will continue to give. But it went within months. Okay? Beach dimmer. But there's another aspect to this, and this is why I brought this book. Unfortunately, as I was preparing for leaving last week, I went to see my grandchildren, and they have a dog. I left a book and the dog helped itself to this. But this is basically a collection of all the bad things that have happened in fisheries. Fishers and the plunderers, right? Theft, slavery, violence at sea. Because all those things are happening. Okay? I've heard some of the ones mentioned today, but it's full of examples from all over the world about what is going on in the sea, those that we see and those that we don't. And all of them need to be addressed. So in this case, indigenous Fijians, who are the owners of the fishing grounds, customary owners, they get to go and dive, and because they've cleared up all the ones in shallow areas, now have to use all kinds of hurriedly put together equipment. Some, they basically just have a generator up on the boat, and they have hose pipes that they then use to dive meters. Okay? Some go dive with tanks, but without training. So they suffer from burns and all those kinds of diseases and even death. But somebody else controls the price. Okay? The last time I checked, the beach dimmer in Hong Kong was selling for about $200 a kilo. The farmer or the fisher who was doing the diving and risking it all was being paid 40 Fijian dollars. Okay? And it's that kind of unequitable distribution of return that makes the problem even worse. And that's why it needs to be brought under some kind of control by our authorities. So in terms of what needs to be done, in addition to all of those international conventions, the region, I must say, has been quite successful in controlling distant water fishing within the region because they have decided to work together. And that's another message I would like to leave with you. You have spent some time together. Please keep your network. Make sure you never lose contact with the person from some other part of the world, because you never know when you might need his or her advice on the problem that you want to deal with at home. In the Pacific, because of our very obvious restrictions, we've decided to work together a long time back. And on this occasion, for coastal fisheries, they produced the NUMEA Coastal Fisheries Strategy some years back, Pathway to Change. It basically emphasizes co-management, government. All government agencies need to work together, but that's still not enough. You have to work with non-government players, civil society organizations, and research institutions, the universities, and of course, local communities. It has to be a co-management exercise. You need to consider the role of the communities. And the aim is to create informed and empowered coastal communities. If you can get the coastal communities to work with you, your job will be a lot easier. Because you can't be everywhere all at once. But if you have got agents, ears and eyes at the local level, I think the chance of making a difference would be a lot better. So, and this is the aim of this, or one of the aims that I like, is the enhancement of capacity at provincial, local government level to support fishing communities. Okay? There are also some sub-regional groups. The region, the Pacific region, is divided into 3 major groups. There's Melanesia, there's Polynesia, closer to South America, to the Ecuadorian, Peru and Chile side, and there is Micronesia towards Palau and of course Guam to the north of the Pacific. So this is for the Melanesian countries. They, a few years back, put together a roadmap for coastal fisheries, which is aligned to the FAO voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries. And then the strategy encourages the use of different partners, fisheries agencies, non-government organizations, communities, and of course, as is always important in the Pacific, the donors and outside partners. Okay, just tied to some of the things I've seen earlier, I want to show you what is being done. In 2002, our leaders took to WSSD the first regional ocean policy in the world. Okay? So that was the Pacific Islands Regional Ocean Policy. Some of us, I included, we were a bit worried. 2002 and then into 2010, it took quite a while before the countries, well, let me go back a bit. The aim of that regional policy was sort of to provide the framework, the guide, to then encourage the countries to do their own national plans. So as I was saying, 2002 and up to about the first decade and even more than that, nothing really happened. But after a while, the countries started to have their national ocean plans. And Vanuatu was, I think, the first. They produced theirs in 2016. I think today there are close to 10 countries already having their national plans, which I think is a good way to go. At least they've got the pathway already figured out, The challenge now is to make sure the implementation is done. But in addition, there are all these other initiatives, the Melanesian Spearhead Group, Coastal Fisheries Roadmap, the FFA is the Forum Fisheries Agency, which basically looks after the management of tuna, spearheading a prominent partner in the Western and Central Pacific Fisheries Commission. So they produced a regional MCS strategy. Then the the small island developing states of the world gathered on their third meeting in Samoa, which is in the Pacific, and produced this Samoa pathway. Samoa is in capital because I think it stands for SIDS, Accelerated Modality of Action. Okay? But you know, and this here again is another interesting thing. The world community has been meeting together at different levels since UNCED. You remember when that was? Maybe some of you were not born yet. 1992. Yeah? Since then, 3 such big meetings have happened. Twice in Brazil, once in Johannesburg. Okay? So our leaders took PIROP to the 2002 meeting. But that's at that global level. At the small island developing states level, they've met 3 times as well. So the Samoa was the third. The first 2, I think the first was in Mauritius, and then the second one was in the Indian Ocean. Sorry, the first one was in Barbados, and the second one was in Mauritius. Then the third came to the Pacific, and that's what, okay, so it was hosted in Samoa. So now with SIDS, we are at this stage. SIDS, Accelerated Modalities of Action. Okay? If you understand that, what is that a sign of? Cooperation? Yes, in a lot of ways, but that's for all SIDS. But for me, I'm a bit frustrated. Okay? Like 3 decades have passed since the SIDS first meeting, just like the UN, 3 decades have passed since their first meeting. And we're still going with action plans. When will we act? When everything has fallen apart? Because things are not really standing in a lot of ways waiting for us to act. The problem continues to worsen, but we're still taking time. Economics comes in, politics comes into play. Okay? But, you know, we're running out of time. But let's go back to this. So Vanuatu was the first national country to have its own national plan. And this is their vision: a healthy and sustainable fisheries sector for the long-term economic, social, and food security for current and future generations of Vanuatu. The mission to provide an effective, efficient, transparent, accountable service delivery through participatory approach to ensure long-term sustainable fisheries management and conservation and development. Okay? Noble, but it needs to be put in place, needs to be implemented. By the way, this is from a protected area I have with my communities, local communities where I come from. So we've been having local communities declare a portion of their fishing ground no take. And it shows that when we are not there, when we are not fishing in areas, they actually do recover. So you see, these are baby clams, okay, from a few big ones that were put in that protected areas. That's the product. But the problem is that after this photo was taken, poaching continued, and basically they stole the mature animals, and things fall apart. And that's the sad part that we need to address somehow. going back to this, that's the Vanuatu vision and mission. But just to show that the effort is being attempted in all of the, or in more than just Vanuatu, in the region, I just picked some strategic actions from the Kiribati policy. And it just shows that there is some consistency in that vision and mission from Vanuatu to the priority strategic actions from Kiribati. And the number over here, out of a total of 32 strategic actions from Kiribati, 21 were about managing the coastal fishery better. The point that I have said earlier, that I think it's now time for the global community to consider whether or not to include coastal fishery in the discussions of how to address challenges such as IUU. Okay, I've provided this in case, because these are going to be notes so that you can then look at it in your own time. And then it continues on with their medium. That was the short term. This is the long term strategic action from Kiribati. And out of the 15 that were there, 10 were on coastal fisheries. And these are some of the examples. Okay? So the problem is serious. Okay? But in our country, in our culture, we don't make appointment to go visit somebody else. You just stand up and go roll up. Yeah. So even if you're going to another island, oh, somebody is here. So I did this with some Japanese partners some years back. Well, I told the people that I work with, I said, I've noticed, in fact, one of my students noticed, every time I come to do visit of the communities, we would see plants that are planted, but they've wilted. And my student said to me, hey, every time we come, all these plants, why are they dead? Like they've just gone from green to being a bit brownish. I said, well, I did not tell him because he's an enemy of mine from where he's from. So I did not tell him the real reason. But with my own people, I then said to them, don't do this to me. I know exactly what is happening. You heard that I was coming, and you quickly went the moment you hear, cut something, and then do this planting in the hope I'll be impressed by you having planted something. No, I'm not. Don't do these things for me. Do it for yourself and your future generations. And that's the problem. So I said to them, from now on, I'm not going to announce my coming. I want to come and see things that you have done because it's the important thing to do for you. Not for me, not for the funder. And that's the problem too, because we're trying to impress others. It seems that whatever we are doing is for somebody else's benefit. It's not, it's for us. So on this occasion, we came at dusk and I asked the community, can we sleep here the night? Yeah. They didn't say, oh, we did not prepare any food for you. Please come. So we went and waited with the men, drinking some kava. About an hour later, the ladies came to say the meal was ready. It was pitch darkness, so this picture was taken, and the only time I saw this was when the flashlight went and I saw the spread. This, for me, is a sign of wealth in coastal communities. Yeah? Whenever you come, there will always be food. But if you are not secure in the source of this food, we are in trouble. Okay, IUU threats. These are the threats to IUU, very similar to what you've discussed in relation to the distant water fishing. But this is all in coastal fisheries. Harmful subsidies, that's been highlighted. How new rules support global effort to eliminate IUU. Okay, fisheries, problem fisheries subsidies. Okay. Unfortunately, the argument is that a lot of those Chinese fishing boats and the ones that dominate the problem at the international fisheries level, they are supposed to be funded through subsidies. And that's why our people are frightened about allowing or having subsidies in coastal fisheries stopped, because they actually have aspiration to develop the capacity at that coastal fisheries level. Okay, so in terms of addressing the threats, it's hard for Pacific Island countries, but they need to do it since it's their responsibility to look after the areas under their jurisdiction. But these are some of the things, talking about that special right that they have, the exemption of excess fees, exclusion of small scale and artisanal fisheries, the removal of unduly onerous and unfair reporting obligation. They consider these as challenges that make it harder for them to comply with international commitments. I think the important thing is to continue to emphasize that these things have to be done for the benefit of the coastal states. Okay, the WTO Fishery Subsidies Agreement must preserve excess fees, which are important revenue sources for member states. So this is why they are worried, because for a lot of the Pacific Island countries, they rely on that revenue from distant water fishing nations for their economic activities. But they are also worried that it might affect the coastal fisheries, and that's why they would like to have coastal fisheries not covered by the discussions with WTO. Small scale and artisanal fishing is for livelihood security and for securing policy space to build fishing capacity in the future. That is the argument that they often mention. And that's what I was saying. It's a challenge, a real challenge that needs to be addressed because depending on those that are in charge of fisheries, the stand can be done for very different reasons. Capacity building is important. So thanks to KMI, I think you can see Dr. Han there somewhere, a younger version of Dr. Han. But this is we've been collaborating with KMI for over the last 10 years. They have been coming to the region to organize training and conferences to exchange ideas, because we learn a lot when we talk to each other, particularly when we have common interests, common responsibilities to deliver on. I want to just give you an example which is similar to a number of cases that were mentioned earlier, but to show that even those that were licensed to fish offshore sometimes actually come much closer to shore. So in this case, well, in Fiji, between 2002 and 2011, over 8 fishing vessels were found guilty of illegally fishing in Fiji's waters by the High Court. This excludes those that went past all the protective measures that were in place. Conviction of a Belize flagged longliner, Liang Chi Seng. Well, I would suspect this is not a Belize name, but I'm reminded of a case that was mentioned earlier of joint ventures, often by partners from China in particular. Yeah. So they had a license to catch tuna and tuna-like species in the EEZ. But on this occasion, they were caught fishing for sharks in archipelagic waters. Okay? That's waters inside of 12 nautical miles from the coast for archipelagos. Okay? So the judge in his ruling gave the advice generally, but on this occasion to this captain, captains, charterers, and owners must conduct themselves with care and prudence when harvesting a Pacific Ocean. They are deemed to know the law. The burden of compliance is on them and not on poor states that cannot police the pirates. There is a legitimate expectation that those engaged in foreign fleet fishing should take care to comply with the rules. there is a legitimate expectation that non-compliance will result in high penalties and forfeiture. So that's the proof that partners that are legally authorized to fish in distant waters, EEZ and beyond, often find themselves in much closer to the coast. I want to finish with some suggestions on how to go forward with this, and I want to illustrate just how connected we are, okay? With this photo that I have here, or this figure. This is a journey of a turtle. It was tagged in Tahiti, and then, sorry, no, this is different. This was tagged in Samoa and released, and that's the journey it takes. You see, in terms of the Pacific, those countries to the east are closer to the Asian continent, so they are bigger, and often the biodiversity is more. So as you move further towards the east, the biodiversity sort of decreases. So the turtles from around the eastern part of the Pacific, they then have to go back eastward. Guess for what? So this is a lot of traveling for food. Okay? You have to basically go back eastward for seagrass. Because to the east you have atolls, smaller islands, coralline islands, so they often don't have areas where seagrass can grow. So the turtles have to go looking for where these things are. So in this case, this particular one went that way towards Kiribati, and then decided Kiribati is just as poor as all the other places to the east, then decided to go southward. Okay? Eventually, that's where it ended on that particular trip. So we're talking about connectivity that maybe we don't even fully understand. Okay? We need to continue with the scientific work. But going back to the suggestions for how to go forward, these are the suggestions from the 12th meeting of the Ministers' Conference of WTO, the one in June of 2022. Basically, they are suggesting that no member shall grant or maintain any subsidy to vessel or operator engaged in IUU fishing. They also agreed for the purpose of that article, it shall be considered, an operator shall be considered engaged in IUU if an affirmative determination is made by the coastal member in areas of its jurisdiction, the flag state, or the regional fisheries management organization. Okay? And again, we've seen examples of those, of these kinds of process discussed in relation to some of the presentations I heard earlier today. Okay? We need, in accordance with the rules and procedures of RFMO and arrangements and relevant international law, including the provision of timely notification, relevant information in areas and for species under its competence. Okay? An affirmative determination under 3.2 refers to the final finding by a member and the final listing by an RFMO or an arrangement that a vessel or an operator has illegally engaged in IUU fishing. Then there is, for the purposes of Article 3.2.a, prohibition under Article 3.1 shall apply where the determination by a coastal state is based on relevant factual information. Okay? The timely notification through appropriate channels that a vessel operator has been temporarily detained for further investigation, for engagement in, or that the coastal member has initiated an investigation for. IUU fishing include all that. By the way, we ended that story quite premature, that journey sort of over there. Some years back, or some years later, there was this other tagged animal. This was tagged in one of the islands that the people in Fiji believe is a nesting ground. And look what it has done after roaming around that island after it had finished staying there, I guess for nesting. It then started on that journey away from the island before I think it got caught or the battery went dead. But that is a portion or a piece of evidence that I hope will help us agree with the point that I will now mention after this. Okay, so basically for all of these details advises member countries on how they can go about addressing this big challenge of IUU by working together and individually. And then lastly, an opportunity to exchange relevant information prior to determination as to allow such information to be considered for the final determination. A coastal member may signify the manner and time of period in which such information exchange should be carried out, and notification of the final determination of any sanctions applied, including, and if applicable, their duration. The coastal member shall notify affirmative determination to the committee. So again, there are guidelines as to how instruments should be developed. The challenge now is to get those things done so that we can then address those challenges that we mentioned at the very beginning. IUU, the sustainable use of coastal fisheries, and ensuring that we get subsidies, but subsidies that would not endanger the viability of our coastal resources. I would like to, just to finish off, this is what I had said earlier. On this occasion, just to try and put a bit of trend to a movement. This is the second turtle released in Tahiti, and it also made that eastwards trip. As I was saying, all the countries to the east of the Pacific are bigger. They have extended areas of coastal flats where you have seagrass and algae and all those things that turtles like to live on. So this animal traveled from Tahiti and then came to Samoa. Okay? The name is Ariti, so you can do this. You can actually look this up on YouTube. Then this is the continuation of that journey. So it finished in Samoa, before Fiji, but after that it then came, and I think it got injured. So the villagers in one of the places over here got to have it repaired. Sorry, they got it treated and then added a new tag, which lengthened the life of the tag. So basically, it then continued on the journey from there to the middle of the country and then went back. And guess what? It went to that place eventually, which is where the people often think there's a nesting place. The continuation of this, if you look up, if you use this link, you will see After here, it then went to Yandua. That's the breeding, the nesting area, known nesting area. And then after that, it went right up past Fiji, all the way straight up north, past the equator, up into Palau. And that's where it then disappeared, maybe because the tag went off. Just to show that we live in a world with one ocean, and the challenges we face, we need to start working together to address. I'd like to just say thank you, and to conclude by saying that IUU is an existential threat facing our industry. Coastal fisheries are critical and are now demanding management. And it is this type of sharing, this type of meeting that I think is important for the sharing of ideas and experiences that we each can learn from, because you all are practitioners, you know what works, what doesn't, and I think it will be much better for us when we put these ideas together to agree on our next to do list. And lastly, that initiatives such as Kept Fish and the institutions such as the World Maritime University are essential for us going forward, because they have the capacity to bring us together and then have us not only enjoy each other's company, but learn from each other, so that we can help map the way into unknown and difficult future awaiting us. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.